June 7, 1893. The Pietermaritzburg railway station platform in Natal, South Africa. A young Indian lawyer, dressed impeccably in a European suit and tie, sits shivering on a wooden bench in the cold mountain air, his overcoat confiscated along with his luggage. 24-year-old Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi has just been forcibly removed from the first-class compartment of the train to Pretoria, despite holding a valid first-class ticket, simply because he is Indian. As the train disappears into the darkness, leaving him stranded in the waiting room of a foreign station, this moment of humiliation ignites a transformation that will eventually topple the British Empire and reshape the course of world history. The shy, stuttering barrister who entered that train compartment will emerge as the Mahatma, the great soul whose philosophy of non-violent resistance will inspire liberation movements across the globe. The bloodline that produced this extraordinary figure traces back through centuries of Gujarati merchant families, whose entrepreneurial spirit and moral complexity would profoundly shape Gandhi's worldview. His great-great-grandfather, Lalji Gandhi, was born around 1750 in the small coastal state of Porbandar, during the twilight years of the Mughal Empire, when local rulers maintained tenuous independence under the shadow of expanding British influence. Lalji belonged to the Modh Bania caste, a community of traders and merchants whose name Gandhi derived from the Gujarati word genchi, meaning grocer or seller of perfumes and spices. The family had likely migrated to Porbandar from Kutch sometime in the early 18th century, following trade routes that connected Gujarat's ports with merchants across the Arabian Sea. Lalji's son, Sri Gokuldas Gandhi, born around 1777, witnessed the gradual consolidation of British power in Gujarat as the East India Company established treaties with local princes and maharajas. Gokuldas lived through the Third Anglo-Maratha War of 1817–1818, which effectively ended independent Indian resistance to British expansion in western India. During this period of political transformation, the Gandhi family maintained their traditional role as advisors and administrators to local rulers, demonstrating the pragmatic flexibility that would later characterize Mohandas's approach to political resistance. The next generation brought Karamchand Gandhi, born around 1804, who served as a minister in the court of Porbandar during the reign of Rana Vikmad. Karamchand witnessed the implementation of Lord Dalhousy's doctrine of lapse in the 1840s and 1850s, by which the British East India Company annexed any princely state whose ruler died without a direct male heir. This policy eliminated dozens of independent Indian states and concentrated power in British hands. However, Porbandar managed to maintain its nominal independence through careful diplomatic maneuvering and the loyalty of administrators like Udhamchand. Karamchand's son, Karamchand Gandhi, born in 1822, would become Mohandas's father and the most politically prominent member of the Gandhi family before his famous son. Known as Kaba Gandhi, he served as the Divan, or Prime Minister of Porbandar, and later held similar positions in Rajkot and Venkaya. His political career spanned the period of the Indian Rebellion of 1857, though the uprising had minimal impact in Gujarat, where local rulers largely remained loyal to the British. Karamchand's administrative skills and diplomatic acumen earned him respect from both Indian princes and British officials, establishing a family tradition of navigating between competing authorities while maintaining personal integrity. In 1847, at the age of 25, Karamchand married his first wife, but she died shortly after the wedding without bearing children. His second marriage, in 1850, was to a woman who also died young, again without producing heir. In 1857, the same year as the Great Indian Uprising, Karamchand married for the third time to Putlibai, a woman from the Pranami Vaishnava community known for their strict vegetarianism and deep religious devotion. This marriage would prove lasting and fruitful, producing 3 sons who would carry the Gandhi name into the next generation. Putlibai came from a family with its own distinguished lineage in Gujarat's religious and commercial communities. Born around 1844, she was the daughter of Premchand Maiteji, a prosperous merchant who had built extensive trading networks across western India. The Mataji family practiced Pranami Vaishnavism, a devotional Hindu sect founded in the 17th century by Mahamati Pranath, which emphasized personal devotion to Krishna while incorporating elements of Islamic mysticism and Christian ethics. This syncretic religious tradition, with its emphasis on tolerance and universal truth, would profoundly influence Mohandas's later spiritual development and his belief in the unity of all religions. The political and economic environment in which Mohandas would be born was rapidly changing, as British control over India consolidated following the 1857 uprising. The Government of India Act of 1858 transferred authority from the East India Company to the British Crown, while the Indian Councils Act of 1861 created legislative councils with limited Indian representation. In Gujarat, these changes meant that local administrators like Karamchand Gandhi increasingly found themselves serving as intermediaries between British officials and Indian subjects, a role that required considerable diplomatic skill and moral flexibility. On October 2, 1869, in the family's ancestral home in Porbandar, Putlibai gave birth to her fourth and final child, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. The infant entered a world where the ancient rhythms of Indian life were increasingly disrupted by British colonial policies, telegraph lines, and railway construction. The Suez Canal had opened just months before his birth, dramatically reducing travel time between Britain and India, and intensifying colonial exploitation of Indian resources. In Europe, the Franco-Prussian War was reshaping the balance of power, while in America, the Transcontinental Railroad was nearing completion, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific coasts for the first time. Mohandas's early childhood in Porbandar was shaped by the competing influences of his father's pragmatic political engagement and his mother's intense religious devotion. Putlibai's daily routine included elaborate prayer rituals, frequent fasting, and pilgrimages to local temples, practices that instilled in her youngest son a deep respect for spiritual discipline and self-sacrifice. The family's comfortable but not luxurious lifestyle reflected Karamchand's position as a senior administrator in a small princely state, where influence counted for more than wealth, and reputation mattered more than material possession. When Mohandas was 7 years old, in 1876, Karamchand moved the family to Rajkot, where he had accepted the position of Diwan under Thakur Sahib Lakriji. This move exposed young Mohandas to a larger and more cosmopolitan environment, as Rajkot served as the administrative center for several princely states in the Kathiawar Peninsula. The city housed the Rajkumar College, established by the British to educate the sons of Indian princes in European methods and values, and Mohandas attended the primary school attached to this institution, where he received his first formal education in English. The curriculum at Rajkot High School reflected the colonial government's goal of creating a class of Indians educated in Western knowledge but loyal to British rule. Students studied English literature, European history, mathematics, and natural sciences, while Indian languages, history, and culture received minimal attention. Despite excelling academically, Mohandas remained painfully shy and avoided speaking in class, a reticence that would plague him well into his adult years. His classmates later recalled him as serious and studious, but lacking the charisma or confidence typically associated with future leaders. During his school years, Mohandas experienced the moral complexities that would later inform his philosophy of truth and nonviolence. At age 13, following local custom, he was married to Kasturba Makanji, a girl of the same age from a prominent Porbandar family. The arranged marriage initially caused him considerable anxiety and guilt, particularly regarding the physical aspects of the relationship, which conflicted with his growing interest in spiritual purity and self-control. This tension between worldly obligations and spiritual aspirations would remain a central theme throughout his life. The teenage years also brought Mohandas into contact with ideas and influences that challenged his family's traditional values. Through a friend, he was introduced to meat-eating, which Gujarati Vaishnavas considered abhorrent, and he secretly consumed goat meat several times before guilt and family pressure convinced him to abandon the practice. He also experimented with smoking and even briefly considered suicide when the shame of his transgressions became unbearable. These early moral crises taught him the importance of self-examination and confession, practices that would later become central to his public leadership style. In 1887, at age 18, Mohandas passed his matriculation examinations and enrolled at Samaldas College in Bhavnagar, the oldest institution of higher learning in Gujarat. However, he struggled with the college's emphasis on English instruction and European academic methods, finding himself unable to follow lectures or participate effectively in discussions. After one difficult semester, he returned home discouraged and uncertain about his future career prospects. The family's expectation that he would follow his father into government service seemed increasingly unrealistic given his poor academic performance and painful shyness. The solution came from an unexpected source when Mavji Dev, a family friend and Brahmin scholar, suggested that Mohandas travel to London to study law. The proposal initially horrified Putlibai, who feared that her son would be corrupted by Western influences and forced to violate religious prohibitions against eating meat and drinking alcohol. However, when Mohandas promised to observe strict vows regarding food, alcohol, and women, she reluctantly agreed to support his education abroad. The family mortgaged property and borrowed money to finance the journey, viewing it as an investment in their son's future and the family's continued prominence. On September 4, 1888, 19-year-old Mohandas sailed from Bombay aboard the steamship SS Safari, bound for London via the Red Sea and Mediterranean. The 3-week journey exposed him to European passengers and customs for the first time, creating culture shock that would take months to overcome. His strict adherence to vegetarianism made dining aboard ship extremely difficult, and his unfamiliarity with European table manners caused considerable embarrassment during formal meals. By the time the ship reached London, he had lost significant weight and was thoroughly intimidated by the prospect of spending 3 years in an alien environment. London in 1888 was the center of the largest empire in human history, a metropolis of 4 million people whose wealth derived from the systematic exploitation of colonial territories around the globe. The city's museums, libraries, and universities showcased European civilization's achievements while largely ignoring the contributions of colonized peoples. The position promised both professional challenge and escape from the stifling environment of Kathiawar politics. On April 24, 1893, leaving behind his wife Kasturba and their infant son Haralal, Mohandas embarked on another sea voyage, this time to Durban, where he would encounter racial discrimination far more systematic and humiliating than anything he had experienced in India. The train journey from Durban to Pretoria that resulted in his ejection at Pietermaritzburg was not an isolated incident, but part of a comprehensive system of racial oppression designed to maintain white supremacy in South Africa. The discovery that his English education, professional qualifications, and personal conduct counted for nothing in the face of racial prejudice shattered his remaining illusions about the benefits of British civilization and colonial rule. Sitting in that cold waiting room throughout the night of June 7, 1893, he resolved to fight the discrimination that relegated Indians to second-class status, regardless of their individual merits or achievements. The next morning, Mohandas completed his journey to Pretoria, but the experiences of that first week in South Africa transformed his understanding of justice, power, and moral responsibility. He discovered that Indians faced a £3 annual tax simply for living in Natal, that Indian marriages were not recognized by South African law, and that Indians could not vote, own property in certain areas, or move freely between provinces. These systematic violations of basic human dignity demanded organized resistance, but the Indian community's divisions along religious, linguistic, and class lines made unified action extremely difficult. Drawing upon his legal training and his family's tradition of diplomatic negotiation, Mohandas began organizing the Indian community to challenge discriminatory laws through petitions, press campaigns, and court cases. In 1894, he founded the Natal Indian Congress, modeled on the Indian National Congress that had been established 9 years earlier in India. However, when legal and constitutional methods proved inadequate against entrenched racial hostility, he developed new forms of resistance that combined Western concepts of civil disobedience with Hindu principles of truth and nonviolence. The development of satyagraha, or truth force, began in 1906 when the Transvaal government proposed the Asiatic Registration Act, requiring all Indians to carry passes with fingerprints and personal details. At a mass meeting in the Empire Theatre in Johannesburg on September 11, 1906, Mohandas led the Indian community in taking a solemn oath to resist the law regardless of the consequences. This marked the beginning of an 8-year struggle that would establish both his reputation as a leader and the philosophical foundations of his later campaigns in India. The satyagraha campaigns in South Africa demonstrated the effectiveness of nonviolent resistance against seemingly overwhelming odds. Through repeated imprisonment, economic sacrifice, and moral example, the Indian community gradually won significant concessions from the South African government, including recognition of Indian marriages, abolition of the £3 tax, and relaxation of immigration restrictions. These victories proved that disciplined nonviolence could achieve political goals that violence could not, providing a model for anti-colonial movements around the world. The personal cost of these campaigns was enormous for Mohandas and his family. Kasturba and their 4 sons endured poverty, harassment, and social ostracism, while he spent months in prison for defying discriminatory laws. His decision to live according to principles of voluntary simplicity, including taking a vow of celibacy in 1906, created tensions within his marriage that were never fully resolved. At age 78, he embarked on a final mission to restore peace between Hindu and Muslim communities, undertaking fasts and prayer meetings in areas ravaged by communal violence. His presence in riot-torn Delhi during the winter of 1947-1948 helped restore order, but it also enraged Hindu extremists who viewed his efforts to protect Muslims as a betrayal of Hindu interests. On January 30, 1948, while walking to his evening prayer meeting at Birla House in New Delhi, Gandhi was shot 3 times at point-blank range by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who blamed him for appeasing Muslims during partition. His last words, "Hey Ram, O God," reflected the spiritual faith that had sustained him through decades of struggle and sacrifice. The assassination shocked the world and demonstrated how violence ultimately destroyed those who practiced it, as Godse and his co-conspirators were tried, convicted, and executed for their crime. The death of Mahatma Gandhi marked the end of an era in Indian history and world politics. His synthesis of religious spirituality and political activism had inspired liberation movements from the American civil rights struggle to the anti-apartheid campaign in South Africa, proving that moral force could triumph over physical power when combined with strategic intelligence and personal sacrifice. The independence of India, achieved through nonviolent resistance rather than armed revolution, provided a model for decolonization that influenced the dissolution of European empires throughout Asia and Africa. Gandhi's bloodline, tracing back through generations of Gujarati merchants and administrators, had produced an individual whose impact transcended all previous family achievements. The practical wisdom of his ancestors, combined with their flexibility in navigating changing political circumstances, provided the foundation for his own ability to adapt ancient spiritual principles to modern political challenges. His transformation from a shy, stammering lawyer into the Mahatma demonstrated how extraordinary leadership could emerge from ordinary backgrounds when moral conviction combined with strategic brilliance and unwavering determination. The legacy of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi extends far beyond the independence of India to encompass fundamental questions about the relationship between means and ends, individual conscience and social responsibility, and spiritual development and political engagement that continue to challenge people around the world. His demonstration that nonviolence could achieve political goals that violence could not has inspired countless individuals and movements seeking justice through peaceful means. While his emphasis on personal transformation as the foundation of social change remains relevant to anyone seeking to create a more just and compassionate world, the modest merchant family that produced this extraordinary figure represents the democratic potential inherent in human society, where greatness can emerge from unexpected sources when individuals commit themselves to principles larger than personal advancement. Gandhi's life story affirms that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they align their actions with their deepest values and persist in the face of seemingly impossible odds, providing hope and inspiration for all who struggle against injustice and oppression in their own times and circumstances.